Hey there, welcome to Sleepy Granny Stories. Let yourself settle now into this quiet moment. Feel the weight of the day gently lifting from your shoulders. Tonight, we journey together to a place where the sea meets the sky, where light guides travellers through darkness, and where small acts of kindness ripple outward like waves upon endless waters. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the story carry you softly into rest. There is a lighthouse that stands at the edge of the world, or so it seems to those who live near it. It rises from a rocky outcrop where land surrenders to ocean, its white tower piercing upward through the salt mist like a finger pointing toward heaven. The lighthouse has stood for 147 years, through storms that tore ships apart and calm nights when the sea became a mirror of stars. Thomas keeps the light. He has kept it for 12 years now, ever since he arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a heart heavy with the weight a life left behind. He tends the lamp each evening as the sun bleeds orange into the western horizon. He polishes the great lens until it gleams. He records the weather in a leather-bound log. He watches the beams sweep across the darkness, faithful and sure, guiding vessels safely past the rocks. The lighthouse stands alone, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that floods at high tide. Thomas has grown to love this solitude, this rhythm of tides and light, wind and stillness. He has learned the language of gulls and the patience of stone. On a morning when autumn had just begun to paint the world in copper and gold, Thomas walks the beach as he does each dawn. The tide has retreated, leaving behind its offerings, driftwood smoothed to silk, shells like tiny sculptures, dark tangles of kelp. The sand is cool and firm beneath his boots. He sees it wedged between two rocks, glinting in the early light. A bottle. Green glass, old and thick, sealed with a cork wrapped in what looks like wax. Thomas bends to retrieve it, brushing away the sand with careful fingers. Inside, he can see paper, rolled tight. Back in the lighthouse kitchen, with a cup of tea steaming beside him, Thomas works the cork free. The paper inside is yellowed but dry, protected by its glass sanctuary. He unrolls it carefully. The handwriting is neat, slanted to the right, written in blue ink that has faded to grey at the edges. The message reads, "My name is Elena. I am 73 years old, and I have lived beside the sea my entire life. Yesterday, I finally forgave my sister after 20 years of silence. I threw this bottle into the waves because I wanted someone to know that it is never too late to let go of anger. I wanted someone to know that forgiveness feels like flying." Thomas reads the words 3 times. He thinks about Elena, 73 years old, standing at the water's edge, throwing her joy into the ocean like a prayer. He wonders where she lives, what her sister's name might be, what those 20 years of silence felt like in her chest. That night, as he climbs the spiral stairs to light the lamp, Thomas carries Elena's words with him. The beam sweeps out across the water, and he imagines it reaching her, wherever she is, a light returning to acknowledge her courage. For 3 days, Thomas cannot stop thinking about Elena's message. It sits on his kitchen table, held flat by a smooth stone he found on the beach. He reads it with his morning coffee, his evening soup. He thinks about the sister, about the forgiveness, about the feeling of flying. On the fourth day, Thomas takes out paper and pen. His hand hovers over the blank page for a long moment before he begins to write. Dear Elena, your bottle found me at a lighthouse where I keep the light burning for ships passing in the night. I want you to know that your words reached someone who needed to hear them. I have been alone here for 12 years, and I had forgotten what courage looks like. You reminded me. Thank you for throwing your joy into the sea. May you and your sister find many years of peace together now. He signs it simply, Thomas, Keeper of the Light. He seals his reply in a bottle of his own, a clear one from his small collection of empties, and walks to the point where the rocks reach furthest into the current. He says a small wish as he releases it, watching it bob and drift, catching the morning light before the waves carry it away. 2 weeks pass. Thomas finds 3 more bottles. The first contains a message from someone named Marco, who writes about teaching his grandson to swim, about the joy of watching fear transform into delight, about the pride of seeing courage born in small splashing moments. The second is from Amara, who describes planting a garden in her mother's memory, how each seed felt like a conversation, how the blooms that followed felt like answers. The third is from a person who signs only with the letter J, telling the story of leaving a generous tip for a struggling waiter and the smile that followed, and how that smile stayed with them for days. Thomas writes replies to each. To Marco, he writes about watching storms from the Lighthouse gallery, about respecting the power of the sea, about the courage it takes to trust the water. To Amara, he writes about the wildflowers that grow in the cracks of the rocks around the lighthouse, how they survive against all odds, how beauty insists on existing even in harsh places. To Jay, he writes about the fishing boat captain who brings him supplies each week, who never forgets to ask how he's doing, whose small kindness means more than the man probably knows. Thomas begins to see his replies as part of the lighthouse's purpose. The lamp guides ships through darkness. His words guide strangers toward knowing they are heard, that their kindness matters, that they are not alone in valuing what is good in the world. Winter arrives with its grey moods and fierce winds. A storm builds over the course of 2 days, the sky darkening to charcoal, the waves rising like mountains. Thomas secures everything that might blow away, checks his generator fuel, stocks candles in case of power loss. He has weathered many storms from this tower. He knows to respect their power, but not fear it. The storm breaks on the 3rd night with a fury that shakes the lighthouse on its foundation. Rain hammers the windows like fists. The wind screams. Thomas tends the light through the darkness, making sure its beam continues its faithful sweep, refusing to let the storm claim any ship that might be struggling in the chaos. By dawn, the storm has exhausted itself and moved on. The world is washed clean, the air sharp and cold. Thomas, tired but satisfied, descends to survey any damage. The causeway is littered with debris. The small boat he keeps tied to the rocks has survived, though it took on water. And there, scattered along the beach like gifts from the sea, are bottles, 7 of them, more than he has ever found at once. Thomas collects them carefully, cradling them in his arms like precious things. Winter arrives with its grey moods and fierce winds. A storm builds over the course of 2 days. The sky darkening to charcoal, the waves rising like mountains. Thomas secures everything that might blow away, checks his generator fuel, stocks candles in case of power loss. He has weathered many storms from this tower. He knows to respect their power, but not fear it. The storm breaks on the 3rd night with a fury that shakes the lighthouse on its foundation. Rain hammers the windows like fists. The wind screams. Thomas tends the light through the darkness, making sure its beam continues its faithful sweep, refusing to let the storm claim any ship that might be struggling in the chaos. By dawn, the storm has exhausted itself and moved on. The world is washed clean, the air sharp and cold. Thomas, tired but satisfied, descends to survey any damage. The causeway is littered with debris. The small boat he keeps tied to the rocks has survived, though it took on water. And there, scattered along the beach like gifts from the sea, are bottles, 7 of them, more than he has ever found at once. Thomas collects them carefully, cradling them in his arms like precious things. Thomas begins to keep the messages. He finds an old wooden box in the storage room, something left behind by a previous keeper. He cleans it carefully, lines it with felt, and places each message inside after he has read it and written his reply. The box becomes a library of light, a collection of human goodness, proof that people all over the world are doing small, beautiful things and wanting someone to know. Each morning, before he makes his breakfast, Thomas reads one message from the box. It becomes a ritual, a way of starting the day by remembering what matters. Some mornings he reads Elena's message about forgiveness. Other mornings he reads Marco's about teaching his grandson to swim. The messages become familiar friends, their words a kind of medicine. Thomas notices that he smiles more. He notices that when the supply boat arrives, he asks more questions, listens more carefully to the captain's stories. He notices that he looks forward to finding bottles the way a child looks forward to presents. The world feels less lonely, even though he still lives alone. On the shortest day of the year, when darkness comes early and stays late, Thomas sees figures on the causeway at low tide. Visitors are rare in winter, and he moves to his window with curiosity. 2 people, walking carefully across the rocks, bundled against the cold. He goes down to meet them, opening the heavy door as they approach. They are an elderly couple, faces ruddy from the wind, eyes bright with determination. "Forgive the intrusion," the man says. "My name is Robert. This is my wife, Eleanor. We've come a very long way." Thomas's heart stops. "Eleanor." The woman smiles, and it is a smile that transforms her whole face. "You wrote back to me," she says softly. "You wrote back, and I found your reply, and I had to come thank you." Thomas invites them inside, still stunned. He makes tea with shaking hands. They sit in his kitchen, and Eleanor pulls out her own wooden box, smaller than his, but filled with messages too. She has been finding bottles for 5 years. She has been casting her own messages for 3. She never expected anyone to write back. She thought her words were just wishes released to the wind and waves. But Thomas's reply found her, and in that reply she found not just acknowledgement, but kinship, another person who understood the value of small kindnesses, who believed in the power of simple words to heal and connect. Robert speaks then about how Eleanor's reconciliation with her sister brought peace to their whole family, about how that peace rippled outward in ways they never could have predicted. The sisters, reunited, began volunteering together at a community centre. They started a program pairing elderly people with young students. They created connection where there had been isolation. All because Eleanor forgave. All because Eleanor threw a bottle into the sea. Thomas shows him his collection. They read messages together, these 3 strangers who are no longer strangers. Eleanor weeps softly when she reads Hassan's message about checking on his neighbour. Robert laughs with delight at Kenji's story about donating bone marrow. Before Eleanor and Robert leave, they tell Thomas about others. It turns out there is a network, loose and informal, of people who find bottles and write replies. They have learned of each other slowly through messages that reference previous messages, through replies that mention other replies. There are dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all over the world, all throwing kindness into the waters, all believing in the power of small good things. Eleanor gives Thomas a list of names and places as far as she knows them. Marco in Italy, Amara in South Africa, Jay in Canada, River in New Zealand, Hassan in Morocco, Grace in Ireland, Sophia in Greece, David in Australia, Kenji in Japan, Maya in Brazil. The world suddenly seems smaller and larger at all once. Smaller because Thomas realizes he is part of something vast, a web of connection spanning oceans and continents. Larger because he sees how much goodness is happening in all these far-flung places, how many people are trying to be kind, to do right, to make the world a little better in their small corner of it. After Eleanor and Robert leave, walking carefully back across the causeway as the tide begins its return, Thomas climbs to the lamp room and stands in the gallery, looking out at the endless water. The beam sweeps its faithful arc through the gathering darkness. He understands now. The lighthouse is not separate from the world. It is connected to everything. The light reaches out, and light comes back. Messages sent, messages received. Kindness offered, kindness returned. We are all keeping light for each other in our own ways. Winter deepens. Thomas continues finding bottles, continues writing replies. But now he does something more. He begins to document the messages, creating a journal of kindness. He writes down each story in neat script, adding his own observations about what the story teaches, how it might guide someone struggling with similar challenges. When Sophia writes about apologizing, Thomas writes about the courage of humility. When David writes about the homeless veteran, Thomas writes about seeing beyond surfaces to the humanity underneath. When Grace writes about self-forgiveness, Thomas writes about the weight of carrying unnecessary burdens and the freedom of letting them go. The journal grows thick with stories. It becomes a map of human goodness, a testament to the fact that people everywhere are choosing kindness over cruelty, forgiveness over resentment, connection over isolation. Thomas realizes he is creating something that might outlast him, something that might guide future lighthouse keepers or anyone who needs reminding that the world is full of people trying to do good. Spring arrives with its promise of renewal. The wildflowers return to the rocks, tough little blooms in purple and yellow. The days lengthen. The supply boat comes more frequently as the sea calms. One day, the captain brings news. There's a young woman in the village, he says, a writer. She's heard about you, about the bottles. She wants to visit, if you'd allow it. Thomas considers. He has grown comfortable with solitude again, but it is a different solitude now, one that knows it is connected to others across distance. He agrees. Her name is Sarah, and she arrives with a notebook and a hesitant smile. She is writing a book, she explains, about small acts of kindness and their ripple effects. She has heard rumors of the lighthouse keeper who writes to strangers, who collects stories of goodness from the sea. Thomas shows her his collection, his journal. He tells her about Elena and Robert, about Marco and Amara, and all the others. He explains his understanding that kindness is not just a nice thing to do, but a necessary thing, a force that holds the world together when everything else threatens to tear it apart. Sarah listens with the intensity of someone hearing truth. She asks if she can share some of the stories, changing names to protect privacy, adding them to her book. Thomas agrees on one condition, that she emphasizes not the stories themselves, but what they teach, that it is never too late to forgive, that small acts matter, that we are all connected by our shared humanity, that empathy is a muscle we must exercise, that kindness returns to us in unexpected ways. Summer brings tourists to the coast, and occasionally they walk the causeway at low tide to see the lighthouse. Thomas, who once avoided such visitors, now welcomes them. He has learned that isolation was never protection, only postponement. He has learned that every person carries stories, that every interaction is an opportunity for kindness. One afternoon, a family arrives, mother, father, 2 young children. They are delighted by the lighthouse, asking questions about the lamp, the foghorn, the life of a keeper. Thomas answers patiently, then takes them to the gallery to show them the view. While they are there, Thomas notices the sky changing. His trained eye reads the signs, a certain quality of light, a shift in the wind, the way the birds are flying. A storm is building, and it will arrive faster than the weather reports predicted. You need to leave now, he tells the family, gently but firmly. The tide is turning, and there's a storm coming. The causeway will be impassable in less than an hour. The father checks his phone, frowns. The forecast says, "I've kept this light for 12 years, trust me." Something in his voice convinces them. They leave quickly, the children being hurried along. Thomas watches them cross the causeway, making it to the mainland just as the tide begins to surge over the rocks. The storm arrives precisely when Thomas predicted. It is fierce, but shorter than the winter storms, a summer squall with more fury than endurance. Thomas tends the light through the wind and rain, standing his watch as he always does. The next morning, at low tide, Thomas finds a bottle in an unusual spot, not scattered on the beach, but placed carefully on the rocks at the very end of the causeway, exactly where the family would have passed the day before. Inside is a message in a child's careful handwriting. "Thank you for keeping us safe. My dad says you probably saved our lives because we would have been stuck when the storm came. My mum says you are a guardian angel. I think you are a lighthouse keeper, which is maybe the same thing. This is my first message in a bottle. I hope it finds someone who needs to know that there are people who watch out for strangers. Love, Mia, age 9. Thomas reads the message 3 times, his eyes stinging. He has received dozens of messages by now, has written dozens of replies, but this one, from a child who learned what kindness looks like from a single warning, from a single act of care for strangers, moves him deeply. He writes back, "Dear Mia, thank you for your message. You are right that lighthouse keepers watch out for people, even people we don't know. That is what we do. But you can be a lighthouse keeper too, even if you never work in a lighthouse. You can watch out for others. You can warn them of danger. You can offer light in darkness. You can be someone who cares. Keep writing messages in bottles. Keep believing in kindness. The world needs more lighthouse keepers like you. Your friend, Thomas." He places his reply in a bottle and leaves it on the rocks where it will be easy to find. He imagines Mia finding it, reading it, learning that her kindness was received and returned. He hopes she will remember, years from now, that a lighthouse keeper once told her she could be a keeper of light too. It is a day in autumn, exactly 13 years since Thomas first arrived at the lighthouse. He marks it by doing what he always does, tending the light, walking the beach, keeping his watch. But now these rituals feel different. They are not acts of isolation, but acts of connection. He is not alone on his rocky outcrop. He is part of a vast network of people choosing to care, choosing to reach out, choosing to believe that small kindnesses matter. His collection has grown to nearly 200 messages. His journal has filled 3 volumes. Sarah's book has been published, and she has sent him a copy with a dedication that reads, "For Thomas and all the lighthouse keepers, both literal and metaphorical, who guide us through darkness." Eleanor writes to him now in letters sent by post, not bottles. She and her sister are still volunteering together. Marco sends photos of his grandson, now a confident swimmer. Amara sends seeds from her mother's garden, and Thomas plants them in pots on the lighthouse gallery, where they bloom improbably in the salt wind. The network has grown. More people are finding bottles, writing messages. casting them into the seas and oceans and rivers and lakes of the world. Small stories of forgiveness, kindness, courage, hope. Small acts of connection across distance and difference. Thomas understands now what he did not understand 13 years ago when he arrived with his heavy heart, that healing does not come from isolation, but from connection, that we save ourselves by reaching out to others, that empathy is not a drain on our resources, but a replenishment of them, that kindness makes us larger, not smaller. On the anniversary night, Thomas keeps a special vigil. He climbs to the lamp room as darkness falls and stands in the gallery, watching the beam sweep across the water. He thinks about all the ships he has guided safely past the rocks. He thinks about all the messages he has received and sent. He thinks about Elena and Robert, about Sarah and Mia, about all the strangers who are no longer strangers. The night is clear, the stars bright. The beam reaches out across the darkness, faithful and sure. Thomas imagines it touching each person in his network, each keeper of light, a momentary illumination saying, "I see you. Your kindness matters. You are not alone." He imagines all the bottles floating on all the waters of the world, carrying their messages of hope and forgiveness and human goodness. He imagines the people who will find them, who will read them, who will be changed by them in small but important ways. He imagines the replies being written, being cast back into the current, finding their way to someone who needs to hear that their kindness was received. The world suddenly seems less dark, less lonely, less harsh, not because it has changed, but because Thomas has changed. He has learned to see the light that people carry, the small beacons of kindness that illuminate the world in ways that matter more than he once understood. Winter comes again, as winter always does. Thomas is walking the beach after a storm when he sees a figure standing at the water's edge, holding a bottle, seeming uncertain. He approaches. The figure is a young man, perhaps 30, with the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. He turns as Thomas approaches. "I found this," the young man says, holding up the bottle. "I read it. It's about forgiveness, about letting go of anger." He pauses. "I don't know if I can do that." Thomas sees himself in this young man, sees the person he was 13 years ago when he arrived at the Lighthouse, fleeing his own failures to forgive, his own stored-up angers and regrets. "Tell me," Thomas says simply. And the young man does. He tells about a brother, about a business venture that failed, about blame and resentment that has festered for 5 years. He tells about family gatherings missed, holidays spent in bitter solitude, a relationship destroyed over something that, in the telling, seems so small compared to what was lost. Thomas listens. He does not offer easy solutions. He does not minimize the hurt. Instead, he tells his own story. He tells about arriving at the Lighthouse 13 years ago, running from his own failures, his own inability to forgive himself and others. He tells about finding Eleanor's first message, about learning slowly that forgiveness is not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing, letting go of the stone you are carrying so you can use your hands for other things. "The bottles taught me," Thomas says, that everyone is struggling with something, that everyone is trying, in their own way, to be better than they were. Your brother is carrying his own burden too. Maybe it's time to set them both down. The young man is quiet for a long time, looking at the bottle in his hands. Finally he says, "If I wrote a message, would you send it? I'm not ready to give it to him myself, but maybe I could practice. Maybe I could write what I wish I was brave enough to say." "Yes," Thomas says, "write it, cast it into the water. Let it be practice for the real words that will come later when you're ready." The young man returns to the lighthouse the next day with a bottle. He has written his message, sealed it carefully. Together, he and Thomas walk to the point where the current runs strong. The young man holds the bottle for a moment, then releases it. They watch it bob and drift, catching the winter light. "Thank you," the young man says, "for listening, for not telling me what to do, for just being here." Thomas nods. He thinks about how the lighthouse has taught him this, that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be present, simply witness someone else's struggle, simply hold space for their pain and their hope. The young man leaves, but he returns a week later, and then again. He walks the beach with Thomas, helps maintain the lighthouse, learns the rhythms of tides and light. He doesn't talk much about his brother at first, but slowly, over the course of the winter, the story emerges in pieces, and with each piece, the burden seems lighter. In early spring, the young man tells Thomas he has called his brother. They have talked. It was awkward and painful and necessary. They are not repaired, not yet, but they have started. They have taken the first step. I kept thinking about that message in the bottle, how someone I've never met trusted that their words would reach someone who needed them. It made me think that maybe trust is possible, maybe reaching out is possible, maybe forgiveness is possible. Thomas watches the young man leave, walking the causeway with lighter steps than he had months ago. The circle completes itself. Thomas received kindness from strangers in bottles. He passed that kindness forward, and now someone else has been changed, will go out into the world carrying the lesson, will pass it forward again. This is how light spreads. This is how kindness multiplies. This is how we save each other, in small ways, every day. On a morning when the world is gold with spring light, Thomas receives a letter. It is from the Lighthouse service, informing him that the lighthouse will be automated next year. His position is being eliminated. The age of lighthouse keepers is ending. Thomas reads the letter 3 times. He feels something he didn't expect. Not sadness, but gratitude. He has kept the light for 13 years. He has walked these beaches, tended this lamp, stood watch through countless storms. He has found messages in bottles and written replies. He has been changed by small acts of kindness from strangers. He has learned to live differently, to see differently, to understand what matters. But the light will go on without him, and the messages will continue, and the network of kindness will keep spreading. His small part in it will end, but the thing itself will endure. Thomas decides to spend his last year preparing a gift. He copies his journal, the 3 volumes of stories and observations about kindness and empathy and human goodness. He sends copies to Elena, to Sarah, to the Lighthouse Service archives. He wants the stories preserved, wants them available to anyone who might need reminding that the world is full of people trying to do good. He also decides to do something more. He creates a website with Sarah's help. It is simple, a place where people can share their stories of kindness, small acts that made a difference, moments of connection that changed something. It is a digital collection of bottles, messages cast into a different kind of sea. The website grows slowly but steadily. Stories arrive from all over the world. The network expands beyond bottles to include anyone who wants to share or read about small acts of human goodness. Thomas moderates it from the Lighthouse, spending his evenings reading stories, approving posts, watching the light spread. The last day arrives with surprising gentleness. It is a day in early summer, warm and clear. The new automated system has been installed. Thomas has packed his belongings, though there is less than he expected. 13 years of living simply has taught him he needs little. The supply boat captain comes to take him back to the mainland, but first Thomas climbs the spiral stairs one last time. He stands in the gallery, looking out at the endless water, the rocky shore, the sky that goes on forever. He thinks about all he has learned here, about solitude and connection, about kindness and empathy, about the power of small acts to change lives, about the network of light that connects all of us, whether we see it or not. He thinks about Elena's first message, about forgiveness feeling like flying. He thinks about Mia learning that she could be a lighthouse keeper too. He thinks about the young man who learned to trust again. He thinks about all the messages he has read and written, all the stories of human goodness that have passed through his hands like benedictions. The beam will go on sweeping the darkness, faithful and sure, guided now by circuits and sensors instead of human hands. But Thomas understands that he will carry the light with him, that once you have learned to keep light for others, you never stop. You just find new ways to do it. He locks the door behind him and walks the causeway for the last time, carrying his small bag. The boat captain greets him with a smile. As they pull away from the rocks, Thomas looks back at the lighthouse, white against the blue sky, standing as it has stood for 160 years. "What will you do now?" the captain asks. Thomas thinks about the young man who spent the winter learning forgiveness. He thinks about the website, growing slowly but surely. He thinks about all the people in the world who are trying to be kind, who are reaching out, who are keeping light for others in their own ways. "I think," Thomas says slowly, "I'll keep doing what I've been doing, just in a different place. There are always people who need light. There are always messages that need sending, kindness that needs passing forward." The captain nods, understanding something of what Thomas means, even if not all of it. Thomas settles in a small coastal town, in a cottage with a view of the sea. He continues moderating the website of kindness stories. He volunteers at the library, helping people learn to use computers, to connect with others, to find information and resources. He discovers that his years of solitude have made him a patient teacher, someone who can sit with people in their struggles without rushing them towards solutions. He still walks beaches, still finds bottles occasionally, still writes replies. But now he also does other things. He visits the elderly widow down the street, checking on her the way Hassan checked on his neighbour. He tutors children who struggle with reading the way Maya's daughter's teacher did. He donates blood regularly, thinking about Kenji's bone marrow donation. He leaves generous tips, thinking about Jay's waiter. Small acts, every one of them. No grand gestures, no dramatic rescues, just the daily choice to care, to reach out, to be kind. Just the understanding that empathy is not a burden, but a gift, both in the giving and the receiving. One day, in the library, a woman asks him why he volunteers. "What do you get out of it?" she asks, genuinely curious. Thomas thinks about how to answer. He thinks about 13 years of messages in bottles. He thinks about Eleanor's forgiveness, Mia's gratitude, the young man's healing. He thinks about the network of kindness, the web of connection that spans the world. "I get to be part of something larger than myself," he says finally. "I get to remember that people matter. I get to practice being human. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I get to be someone's lighthouse, even if only for a moment." The woman nods slowly, and Thomas sees something shift in her face. A week later, she starts volunteering too. Thomas settles in a small coastal town, in a cottage with a view of the sea. He continues moderating the website of kindness stories. He volunteers at the library, helping people learn to use computers, to connect with others, to find information and resources. He discovers that his years of solitude have made him a patient teacher, someone who can sit with people in their struggles without rushing them towards solutions. He still walks beaches, still finds bottles occasionally, still writes replies. But now he also does other things. He visits the elderly widow down the street, checking on her the way Hassan checked on his neighbour. He tutors children who struggle with reading, the way Maya's daughter's teacher did. He donates blood regularly, thinking about Kenji's bone marrow donation. He leaves generous tips, thinking about Jay's waiter. Small acts, every one of them. No grand gestures, no dramatic rescues. Just the daily choice to care, to reach out, to be kind. Just the understanding that empathy is not a burden, but a gift, both in the giving and the receiving. One day, in the library, a woman asks him why he volunteers. "What do you get out of it?" she asks, genuinely curious. Thomas thinks about how to answer. He thinks about 13 years of messages in bottles. He thinks about Elena's forgiveness, Mia's gratitude, the young man's healing. He thinks about the network of kindness, the web of connection that spans the world. "I get to be part of something larger than myself," he says finally. "I get to remember that people matter. I get to practice being human. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I get to be someone's lighthouse, even if only for a moment." The woman nods slowly, and Thomas sees something shift in her face. A week later, she starts volunteering too. Thomas hangs Mia's painting beside his window, where the morning light catches it. He looks at it often, remembering his 13 years at the Lighthouse, remembering how he arrived heavy with burdens and left light with understanding. But now, in his later years, Thomas finds himself becoming a student again. The young volunteers who run the website teach him about new technologies, new ways of connecting. The children he tutors teach him about resilience, about finding joy in small victories. The elderly widow he visits teaches him about grace, about facing loss with dignity, about the art of remembering without being trapped by the past.
Every person becomes a teacher when we are willing to learn. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for growth when we approach it with humility and openness. Thomas learns this slowly, discovers that the Lighthouse years taught him to receive as well as to give, to be changed as well as to change others. He starts a practice of writing thank you notes, not for grand gestures, but for small moments of kindness, to the grocery clerk who always asks about his day, to the postal worker who carefully delivers packages, to the neighbour who waves from across the street, to the librarian who saves books she thinks he might like. Small notes, handwritten on cards with the lighthouse on them. Simple words. Thank you for your kindness. It matters more than you know. He signs them just T and leaves them anonymously, paying forward the feeling he had when he received those first messages in bottles, the feeling of being seen, of mattering, of connecting across the space between one human and another. On a day in late spring, when the world is alive with bloom and birdsong, Thomas receives an invitation. It is from Sarah, the writer who first documented the Lighthouse messages. She is organizing a gathering, she writes, of people from the Kindness Network. Those who write messages, those who find them, those whose lives have been changed by small acts of connection. The gathering is to be held at the Lighthouse, which has been preserved as a historic site. Thomas can hardly believe it. He will return to the place that changed his life, but this time not alone. This time accompanied by the community he helped create, the network of lightkeepers. When the day arrives, Thomas makes the journey with a heart full of anticipation. The causeway is the same, the rocks familiar beneath his feet. The lighthouse stands as it always has, white and faithful, its beam automated now, but still sweeping the darkness each night. There are perhaps 50 people gathered. Thomas recognizes some from photographs and letters. Elena and Robert, older now but still together, still radiating the peace that forgiveness brought. Marco with his grandson, now a teenager. Amara, carrying seeds from her mother's garden to share. Hassan, who brought his elderly neighbour, the one he checks on daily. Grace, whose self-forgiveness opened new chapters in her life. And there are others Thomas has never met. People who found messages, people who wrote replies, people who started their own practices of kindness after reading stories on the website. People from 20 different countries, speaking a dozen different languages, united by a simple understanding that kindness matters, that empathy connects us, that small acts ripple outward in ways we can never fully measure. They gather in the lighthouse and on the rocks around it, and they share stories, not in any formal way, but organically, naturally, the way people share stories when they feel safe and seen. Eleanor talks about her sister, about the years they have had together since their reconciliation, about the programs they have started, the lives they have touched. It all began, she says, because I was willing to throw my hope into the ocean, and because someone, she looks at Thomas, was willing to acknowledge it. Marco tells about his grandson learning to swim, and then learning to teach others to swim, and now working as a lifeguard, saving lives, carrying forward the lesson that courage can be taught, that fear can be transformed. A young man Thomas doesn't know speaks about finding a message about forgiveness, about how it gave him the courage to reconcile with his father after years of estrangement. Another woman talks about a message that reminded her to check on her neighbours after a natural disaster, which led to starting a community emergency response network. The stories weave together, creating a tapestry of kindness, a picture of how one small act connects to another, how empathy multiplies, how goodness spreads like light across water. Thomas listens more than he speaks. He is awed by what has grown from such small beginnings. A message in a bottle, a willingness to reply, a belief that connection matters. He thinks about the principle of emergence, how complex, beautiful things arise from simple, repeated actions. This network, this community, this gathering of people committed to kindness, it emerged from the simple choice to care, repeated over and over by hundreds of people.
As evening approaches, they climb the spiral stairs together, carefully, reverently, to the lamp room at the top. The automated light is already beginning its sweep, preparing for the darkness to come. They stand in the gallery, looking out at the sea and sky, and someone begins to sing softly. It is a simple melody, wordless, just a human voice expressing something that words cannot quite capture. Others join in, humming, harmonizing, creating music that rises up and out across the water. Thomas stands among them, feeling the vibration of voices, feeling the warmth of bodies pressed together in the small space, feeling connected in a way he never felt during his years of solitude here. He was not wrong to seek solitude then, he realizes. He needed it, needed the quiet to heal, needed the space to learn to listen. But he was wrong to think solitude was the answer. The answer was finding the balance, learning to be both alone and connected, learning to keep his own counsel while also reaching out to others. The lighthouse holds them all as the last light fades from the sky and the beam grows bright, sweeping across the darkness. It holds their voices, their stories, their commitment to kindness. It holds the memory of all the keepers who came before, all the ships guided safely home, all the messages found and sent and received. Buildings remember, Thomas thinks. Places hold the energy of what happens within them. This lighthouse remembers keepers tending light through storms. It remembers ships saved from rocks. It remembers a solitary man learning to connect again. And now it will remember this, a gathering of light keepers, literal and metaphorical, celebrating the power of small kindnesses to change the world. Before they leave the lighthouse, each person writes a new message. They have brought bottles, hundreds of them, collected over months in preparation for this moment. They write messages about what they have learned, what they hope for, what kindness means to them. Thomas writes, "To whoever finds this, you are part of a vast network of people who believe in goodness. Your small acts of kindness matter more than you can know. They ripple outward in ways you will never fully see. Keep being kind. Keep reaching out. Keep believing that connection heals. You are not alone. You are part of the light." They walk down to the shore at low tide, all 50 of them, and together they release their bottles into the current. Hundreds of messages floating out on the tide, catching the moonlight and the sweep of the lighthouse beam. They watch until the bottles disappear into the darkness, carried by the water to destinations unknown. It is one of the most beautiful things Thomas has ever seen, this physical representation of hope, of belief in human goodness,
of commitment to spreading light. He thinks about who might find these bottles, what they might need to hear, how they might be changed by the words inside. Some will find them next week, washed up on nearby beaches. Some will find them next year, carried by currents to distant shores. Some may never be found at all, but that's all right too. The act of sending is itself meaningful. The choice to reach out, to offer kindness into the void, and trust it will land somewhere it is needed. That choice changes the person making it.
The gathering ends as the sun rises the next morning. People depart in small groups, hugging goodbye, promising to stay connected, carrying with them the feeling of having been part of something larger than themselves. Thomas is one of the last to leave. He stands once more at the base of the lighthouse, his hand on the sun-warmed stone, saying his own goodbye, not to the building, but to the man he was when he first arrived here, heavy with burdens, unable to forgive, convinced that isolation was safety. Thank you, he whispers to the lighthouse, to the years spent here, to the messages that found him, to the lesson learned slowly through repetition, that we are made to connect, that kindness is the highest calling, that empathy is what makes us most fully human. He walks the causeway one last time, carrying Mia's painting carefully wrapped, carrying memories of 13 years and one perfect gathering, carrying the understanding that keeping light is not about tending a lamp in a tower, but about how we move through the world every day. Back in his cottage, Thomas continues his practices. He walks beaches, writes thank you notes, volunteers at the library, checks on his elderly neighbour. He moderates the website, now grown to thousands of stories from every continent. He corresponds with people from the gathering, maintaining the connections formed. But he also does something new. He starts teaching workshops about empathy and kindness, about how to build connection in an increasingly disconnected world. He teaches not from theory, but from experience, from 13 years of receiving and sending messages, from the transformation he lived through. People come to his workshop skeptical, armoured, convinced that kindness is naive, or that empathy is weakness. Thomas does not argue with them. He simply tells stories. Elena's story, Marco's story, the young man who learned to forgive his brother, Mia who became a social worker, the network that grew from a single message in a bottle. He tells them about the ripple effects, about how one kind act creates conditions for another, about how empathy multiplies when practiced. He gives them homework. Do one small kind thing for a stranger this week. Notice how it feels. Notice what happens. They come back changed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to know that the teaching matters, that the message is spreading, that the light continues to grow. Years pass in their gentle way, Thomas grows older, his hair completely white now, his face weathered like driftwood, but peaceful. He has lived a good life in his later years, a life of connection and purpose, of giving and receiving, of keeping light in small daily ways. One winter evening, there is a knock at his door. He opens it to find a teenager, perhaps 17, holding a bottle. "I found this on the beach," the boy says. "It has your name on it. I looked you up. I wanted to return it to you." Thomas takes the bottle with trembling hands. Inside is a message in his own handwriting, faded now but still legible. It is one of his earliest replies, written perhaps 20 years ago, to a message he no longer specifically remembers. But the words he wrote are clear. "Your kindness matters. It ripples outward in ways you will never fully see. Keep believing in goodness. Keep reaching out. You are part of the light." "I needed to read this," the boy says quietly. Things have been hard. I was thinking that nothing I do matters, that the world is too broken, that kindness is stupid. But then I found this bottle and I read it, and I thought, maybe not. Maybe there's a point to trying to be good." Thomas invites the boy in. They talk for hours. The boy tells his story, a story of loss and struggle, of feeling disconnected and alone, of wondering if caring about others is worth the pain it brings. Thomas listens, really listens, the way he learned to listen during his years at the Lighthouse. Then Thomas tells his story, about arriving at the Lighthouse broken, about finding messages that saved him, about learning that kindness is not weakness but strength, that empathy is not vulnerability but courage, that connection is not risk but reward. "You found my message," Thomas says, "at exactly the moment you needed it. That's how it works. That's how kindness works. It reaches across time and space and finds the person who needs it. And now you get to decide, will you keep it or will you pass it forward?" The boy is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "I want to pass it forward. I want to be part of the light too." Thomas is very old now. His body has grown frail, but his mind remains clear, his heart still full of the lessons learned over a lifetime of keeping light. He can no longer walk long beaches or climb lighthouse stairs, but he still writes messages, still moderates the website from his laptop, still keeps his practices of connection and kindness. The website has become something extraordinary, a global network of people committed to small acts of kindness, a repository of thousands of stories, a testament to human goodness. Universities study it, documentaries have been made about it. But Thomas knows that its real importance is not in its size or fame, but in what it represents. Proof that people everywhere are trying to be good, that kindness is not rare but constant, that empathy connects us all. On a quiet morning in early spring, Thomas sits by his window looking at Mia's painting of the lighthouse. The sun is rising, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. He thinks about his life, about the journey from brokenness to wholeness, from isolation to connection, from receiving kindness to passing it forward. He thinks about all the people who have touched his life through messages in bottles, through the website, through the workshops and gatherings. He thinks about the network of light that spans the world, all the people keeping light for each other in small daily ways. He realizes that he has become what he sought at the lighthouse all those years ago. He has found peace, not through isolation, but through connection, not through protecting himself from others, but through opening himself to them, not through avoiding pain,
that through acknowledging that pain shared is pain diminished, while joy shared is joy multiplied. The lighthouse beam sweeps across his memory, faithful and sure. He understands now that we are all lighthouse keepers, all of us, whether we know it or not. Every act of kindness is a beam of light cutting through darkness. Every moment of empathy is a warning of danger, a guide to safety. Every connection we make is a ship guided home. Thomas closes his eyes, still seeing the painting of the lighthouse in his mind, still feeling the warmth of the rising sun on his face. He thinks about the messages still floating on the waters of the world, still finding people who need them, still spreading light. He thinks about the boy who found his old message and chose to pass kindness forward. He thinks about Mia, keeping her own kind of light as a social worker. He thinks about Helena and all the others, all the keepers of light. His last thought is peaceful and complete. The light goes on. The light always goes on. We tend it for a while, and then we pass it to others, and they tend it, and they pass it forward. This is how we save each other. This is how we save the world. One small kindness at a time, one message in a bottle, one act of empathy, one moment of connection. The light goes on.
Let the story rest gently in your mind now. Let its warmth settle around you like a soft blanket. Remember that you too are a keeper of light. Your small acts of kindness matter. Your empathy connects you to all of humanity. Your choice to care ripples outward in ways you will never fully see. Sleep now, peaceful and connected, knowing that the light goes on. Always, the light goes on.